Hello and welcome to this week's episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary podcast for people on the go. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, joined this and every week by my friend and colleague Dr. Amy Robertson. As biblical scholars, we dig deeply into the biblical text to see what insights it might reveal. As people of faith, we wrestle with how the Bible informs our own lives and the lives of our communities. This week, the Narrative Lectionary brings us to 1 Kings 18, the story of a contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, as God and Baal compete for the loyalty of the people. We discuss the struggle of remaining faithful in a world that worships other gods, the prophetic force of the Elijah narrative in the face of the easy narratives of consumerism, militarism, and capitalism, and what you should do when you think your false god needs to poop. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Bobby. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, too. We are moving on this week into 1 Kings chapter 18, which is the story of the prophet Elijah and the Israelite king Ahab. We've moved just 6 chapters since our last text, which was the division of the kingdom under Jeroboam and Rehoboam.
It's been only 6 chapters, but there's been a lot of turnover.
In the northern kingdom, which is where we are in this text, there is no Davidic promise, and so the kings, there is coup after coup after coup.
But you also said this is sort of known as a good period in general for the building of the northern kingdom.
In the historical record, the period of the Omrides, Omri and Ahab, is a strong period in Israel's history. They moved the capital of Israel to Samaria from Tirzah, and it's remembered in the historical record as a fairly wealthy and stable time within the northern kingdom of Israel. In the biblical text, by contrast, it is remembered as a terrible, terrible time. All in the world that Omri and especially Ahab have done is taken the sins of Jeroboam, the original putting up of the
putting up those golden bowls.
The bowls
right?
in the non-standard shrines at Dan and Bethel, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They have made it even worse.
Mm-hmm.
Ahab, as you know, is married to Jezebel. Anything you want to tell us about Jezebel?
She also does not have a great reputation in the biblical
She does
text.
not. Jezebel's the daughter of King Hiram of Tyre, so she's Phoenician, and the Phoenicians actually helped Solomon build the temple in Jerusalem, and then Jezebel is married from that family into the family of Ahab. So the Phoenicians and the Israelites have been kind of allies for some time. But the problem with Jezebel, according to the biblical text, is that she is a worshiper of the god Baal, or Baal, and so she brings her Phoenician gods with her, and then Ahab, like Solomon before him, his heart is turned toward false gods and away from Adonai, the God of Israel, and so this becomes a huge problem for the biblical text.
Right. This is the perpetual problem of the northern kingdom, it seems, according to the biblical text anyway.
So when we get to this text, we've just met the prophet Elijah in the previous chapter, and he shows up in 1 Kings 17, kind of out of nowhere, and he goes to Ahab and he says, "Hey Ahab, it's not going to rain anymore until God, the God of Israel, says that it's time for it to rain." And so all the way through chapter 17 and then into the beginning of chapter 18, we're in the middle of a drought, which has been instituted because the God of Israel has said no more rain. Mm-hmm. It's kind of ironic there because Baal, the god that Jezebel and Ahab are worshiping, is the storm god.
Right. He's associated with water.
Right. And so Baal is the god, according to the Canaanite mythology or Phoenician mythology, is the god who makes it rain. And so we've got a battle here that's taking place between the God of Israel and Baal, the god of the Phoenicians.
Right. So then leading right up into our text, it tells us that Ahab and Obadiah split up to look for water. And that is when Obadiah encounters Elijah.
So when we are approaching our text in 1 Kings chapter 18, the narrative lectionary officially begins in chapter 18, verse 20, but it, as an optional reading, 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 17. So we'll start there. I'm reading the New Revised Standard Version. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" He answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now, therefore, have all Israel assemble for me at Mount Carmel, with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." All right, let's just stop there in this kind of introductory paragraph for what's about to come.
I mean, it sounds like they're setting up some kind of showdown. I want all the people of Israel and all the prophets of these other deities to come together.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing number. There's 850 prophets. Presumably, these prophets, we've seen elsewhere in the biblical text where prophets are kind of on the payroll of kings. There's like a prophetic guild. So we've got 850 prophets who of Baal and Asherah who work for Ahab and Jezebel. And in just a minute, we're going to see that Elijah claims that he is the only remaining prophet of Adonai, the God of Israel. And the reason for that is that Jezebel has been kind of systematically killing prophets of Adonai, the God of Israel. And just in the previous little bit, Obadiah had reminded Elijah that when Jezebel tried to kill prophets, Obadiah had hid some of them in a cave.
That's
There's
right.
this, like, battle of prophets that's going on, and what's happening is the king and queen are systematically eliminating prophets of the God of Israel and then replacing them with prophets of the Phoenician gods Baal and Asherah. So when Ahab sees Elijah, he calls him the troubler of Israel, which is kind of the way that kings tend to think about prophets, right? Prophets are almost never telling kings things that they want to hear.
Right. I mean, there are different kinds of prophecy that happen sort of within the biblical text. And so as you mentioned, like with Baal and Asherah, there are these prophets who are hired and sort of work for the palace and are sort of like inside the camp, I guess.
Right.
And then there are these prophets that are sort of the troubler of things, the prophets that call out the hard truths. And I can see how if Elijah claims to have been withholding water all this time, yeah, that sounds like trouble. That sounds like a troubler.
Right. Yeah, that's what Ahab, I think, means is you, Elijah, who have created this drought that has been going on for some time now. We don't really know how long, but it's a significant drought. Then Elijah turns that around and says, no, you are the troubler of Israel. What do you think he means by that?
Well, you're the one who is misleading the people of Israel and worshiping the wrong deity. I mean, you're just taking us on this totally wrong path. So we can have water or not, but you're really leading us astray as the king.
This little interaction between Elijah and Ahab is setting up this conflict between Adonai, the God of Israel, and Baal, who are also part of this political conflict between Ahab and Elijah. So this thing that's happening in the divine realm is playing itself out now also in the political realm.
Yep. Politics and religion.
Good times, yeah. All right, so Elijah says, get everybody to Carmel. So 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of Asherah. Let's go to Mount Carmel. So that brings us to 1 Kings 18:20, which is where the narrative lectionary picked up. So Ahab sent to all the Israelites and assembled the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah then came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him." The people did not answer him a word. Okay, so this is the setup for this contest that's getting ready to take place. Any thoughts about what Elijah is doing there?
I mean, if you're in a sort of polytheistic milieu, it's not a problem to have two different gods that you sort of follow at different times as, you know, situations change or as it sort of suits your purpose. It's fine to believe in more than one God. I feel like what Elijah is really driving home here is it's certainly, yes, that Elijah is a prophet of the God of Israel, but also that you have to choose. You have to choose Baal or Adonai. You can't go back and forth between them. And the people aren't ready to do that.
That the Hebrew there, limping with two different opinions, literally is with limping on two wooden sticks. Or
right, like two boughs on a tree or something.
Yeah, I think the image might be like you're on crutches or something like that. So this idea of like, do I want the God of Israel or the God Baal? Those have become crutches that are limiting them in some kind of a way. They're not able to walk
on their one crutch properly.
Yeah. It's not a perfect.
No, but
metaphor,
okay.
but yeah. So you're going back and forth between these two, and it's holding you back. So you just pick one. And the people don't say anything at all. I mean, they could have said all kinds of things. They just don't say anything.
I guess I read like a little bit of like fear or maybe shame into it, like sort of remembering. I mean, I guess I have to think like, who are these Israelites? Like, what has been the experience of this generation of Israelites? And I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. But certainly we would hope it has been passed down through teachings that, you must choose, as, in the book of Joshua. And so maybe they feel chastened by that, but also unprepared to actually do it.
I mean, and it's really clear whose side the king is on. So if you're worried about political repercussions, you ought to say Baal right here, right?
Right.
You got to pick one. Okay, we're picking Ahab's god. I mean, one way of reading it is they're afraid of the political repercussions of saying that they worship the Lord, the God of Israel, but they're afraid of the theological repercussions of saying they worship Baal, because maybe they actually do believe that the Lord, the God of Israel, is the true God. And so there's nothing that they can say without either incurring the wrath of God or the wrath of the king. They're just kind of stuck there.
It reminds me of, remember Friends, Bobby?
I do remember Friends.
Remember Friends?
Yeah.
Phoebe makes up this game, and she's trying to force... and she sings, you must decide, even though I made them up, you must decide. That's what's running through my head.
That was beautiful. Yeah.
Isn't it beautiful?
So which do you like better, red or green?
Yeah. Just decide, and they won't decide.
You didn't play with me. I was going to...
They won't play Phoebe's game.
Yeah,
Wait,
and then I'm going to say, which god do you prefer, Baal or Adonai? And then we can see what you said, but you wouldn't go along with it. Because it would have been tragic if you had misspoken, I suppose. We would have lost all credibility if you were a Baal worshiper.
That would have been bad.
You don't meet a lot of Baal worshippers. I have never...
No.
I don't know that I've ever...
They're not out in the open anyway.
But we digress. We are limping along with weird opinions.
We go.
Okay.
Yes.
So the people don't say anything. So Elijah says, okay, look, we're going to set up this contest, and it's going to be clear at the end of this chapter. It's going to be clear what you should be answering. So he says, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets number 450. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire is indeed God. All the people answered, well spoken. All right, so Elijah's got a plan. Did you like the way I said that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, thanks. I've been working on my well spoken. That was where I started, and I thought I had to lower my voice. Well, okay, so the idea is then, I mean, I think it's clear in the text, but each of them is going to set up an offering, but they're not going to light the offering. And so the way the offering is going to be offered is fire is going to come down from the sky, either from Baal or from the God of Israel, and light the appropriate sacrifice on fire.
And I think the implication is that since there are 450 prophets for Baal and only 1 prophet for the God of Israel, that sort of like, I don't really know how handicaps work in golf, but like, it's like that, right? Like what, I mean, one of the teams has 450 people, right. So they have every advantage.
Yes.
And Elijah's alone.
Verse 25, Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many. Then call on the name of your God, but put no fire to it. So they took the bull that was given them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal, from morning until noon, crying, O Baal, answer us! But there was no voice, and no answer. They limped about the altar that they had made. At noon Elijah mocked them, saying, Cry aloud, surely he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he has wandered away, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. Then they cried aloud, and, as was their custom, they cut themselves with swords and lances until the blood gushed over them. As midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice, no answer, and no response. All right, that's our story about what the prophets of Baal do. What do you see in there that's interesting to you?
Well, again, I would just point out that possibly by letting them go first, because they're the majority, I don't know if that gives them some advantage or not, but it seems like Elijah's really trying to give every advantage to the other team.
He lets them choose their bull. He lets them choose their wood, right? He's taking whatever they don't take.
Right.
So no one can accuse him of rigging the contest. Yeah.
No confusion about this.
Elijah starts talking smack in the middle of this thing, which I think is so great, right? So the prophets of Baal are doing their thing. They're crying out. They're doing this like limping dance or walk or whatever it is. And then at high noon, Elijah starts mocking them and saying, oh yeah, surely he is a god, right? Surely Baal is really up there. And then he starts thinking of all these things that maybe Baal is doing.
Maybe Baal's in the bathroom.
Yeah, that's actually, So this is one of my favorite verses of the biblical. So in the NRSV, maybe he's meditating or maybe he has wandered away. But the Hebrew there, sieg, actually could mean he's defecating, which I think is so amazing. So maybe he's on a trip, maybe he's taking a poo, or maybe he's doing whatever. I just think that is so brilliant. Yeah.
That is, and yet they find that motivating. That really amps up their agitation level.
Yeah. Maybe he's meditating, maybe he's pooping, maybe he's on a journey, maybe he's asleep. And, in the Canaanite mythology, there is, Baal goes through a cycle where he is in the underworld and then he comes back, and this is the fertility cycle in Canaan. And so in the mythology, there actually is a time when Baal sleeps. And so they could be saying Elijah could be referring to that. Maybe Baal's just still in his time of sleep and he's like overslept. He should have woken up and it should have rained like a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah. So the clear implication is Elijah is saying your God is no God at all. He is not, no matter what you do, he is never going to answer because he's not there.
Right.
All right. So they start gashing themselves. This is some kind of
pretty dramatic.
Yeah, some kind of a flagellation ritual. We don't know about that kind of ritual in Canaanite religion from any place else, but this is the way the text says, as was their custom.
Yeah, the text says it was their custom. Yeah. So okay.
So for whatever is the case, but they're giving it everything they've got. They're even pouring out their blood for this thing, but there was no voice, no answer, no response. All right, verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me," and all the people came closer to him. First he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Then he made a trench around the altar large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. Then he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. He said, Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. Then he said, Do it a second time, and they did it a second time. Again he said, Do it a third time, and they did it a third time, so that the water ran all around the altar and filled the trench also with water. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's stop there. This is how Elijah sets up for his side of the contest.
Yeah, so first, I didn't realize reading along that the altar of the Lord had been damaged. But it starts out by telling us it's been damaged. So first he rectifies whatever that situation was. The
way that I read that, is this the way you read it? Is that this kind of purging of the prophets of the Lord by Jezebel has also been accompanied by destroying the shrines of the Lord as well? Is that how you would read that?
That would make sense.
So the official powers that be, the king and queen and their political regime, have torn down the altar of the Lord and built up the altars of Baal, when the commandment in Deuteronomy is to do exactly the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. So here is Elijah reestablishing the altar
at Carmel.
Carmel. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too in that, so it's building up, taking the 12 stones representing the 12 tribes, which might remind you of the 12 stones that are set up when the Israelites cross the River Jordan in the book of Joshua. The first thing they do when they get in the land is they set up a shrine with the 12 stones.
Yeah, I think in a lot of the cultic ritual, it's important to have a representation of the 12 tribes, that the priestly garments include 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes. So it's nice to see that piece sort of connect through in all these different contexts in which these rituals are performed.
And then it also reminds us of the 12 tribes are the sons of Jacob, who is Israel. And so it goes all the way back to the eponymous ancestor to remind us of this tradition.
Right, and Israel shall be your name, right, is a hearkening back to the renaming of Jacob himself.
So then he digs this trench large enough to contain 2 measures of seed.
He's built a trench around the altar, And then he starts, even in this moment of drought, it is so important to him to make this, to really drive this point home. He starts dumping jars of water over the altar, and it sort of flows into the trench. So he winds up with this big wet pile of wood and meat, right? Surrounded by a trench of water. At the end of the day, it's harder to burn things if they're wet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point.
That's the point.
Elijah has done all the things. There's only one of him. He's given them first choice of their cow. He's given them first choice of their wood. He's let them go first. He's given them all day from morning until the evening offering. He's taken his own wood and he's drenched it with water 3 times. And so he has stacked the cards in favor of the other team, just to prove that when this thing happens, to me, that's the main point of the water.
That's the main, yeah.
I do think it's really interesting that he's taking this, like, you could imagine all these people who are thirsty or, like, need to water their field, and here's Elijah pouring out this water. So, anyway, there could be an interesting interpretation in there, but I don't have it in me right at this exact moment.
But, yeah, no, it's...
Okay, at the time of the offering of the oblation, so now it's time for the evening sacrifice. The prophet Elijah came near and said, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, The Lord indeed is God, the Lord indeed is God. I mean, this fire that comes down from the Lord, it doesn't just, like, burn the offering, but it burns up not just the wood, but it burns all the stones that the altar has been made out of. It burns the dust that was around the altar.
It licks up the water.
It licks up these 12 jugs of water. Like, this was a serious fire that the Lord sent down. So there has been no doubt about this contest. Everybody agreed to it. The prophets of Baal said, yeah, this is a good test. The prophets of Baal did their thing and failed. Elijah hardly does anything at all, and God responds immediately and with tremendous force. So there is no doubt. Like, you could not accuse Elijah of, like, having, tossed a match into the fire. Like,
right, it's incredibly clear.
Yeah. God did this thing, and the people recognize it immediately. They fall on their faces, and they say twice, the Lord is indeed God, the Lord is indeed God. And so the people who were not able to say anything at the beginning of the story, when Elijah put it to them, who is God, they didn't answer him. And now they are very clear. And they say it twice, and they are in a position of worship. So this contest...
they flung themselves on their faces. That's my favorite.
So the narrative lectionary ends right there, very conveniently leaving out verse 40. But I feel like because we are biblical scholars who pay close attention to the text, I feel like we can't just let verse 40 slide by.
Yeah.
So verse 40, Elijah said to the people, Seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one of them escape. Then they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the Wadi Kishon and killed them there. So this text has ended, first of all, with the victory of the God of Israel over Baal, and then it ends with the slaughter of the prophets of Baal.
Yeah, then a little massacre.
Yeah. So thoughts about why, like, what is the significance of that in the text?
Yeah, sort of what after this is, we've already had this demonstration of God's power in the world and this sort of agreement from the Israelites that, yes, indeed, Adonai is God. What's at stake? Like, why then do we have to kill all the prophets? And my best guess is that the Israelites have been led astray before. And so while they seem very clear in this moment, after this very dramatic display of God's power, there's some worry that these false prophets to a false God will be able to lead them astray again, maybe.
The other thing that occurs to me is that Jezebel had been killing all the prophets of the Lord. And so, I mean, we don't, as far as I know, we don't know how many she's killed. But it seems like substantial numbers, because Obadiah had said earlier in this chapter, before the lectionary picked up, that he had been hiding them in caves trying to save them. He says he hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in caves back in verse 13. So a lot of prophets of the God of Israel have also died.
Yes.
And so this could be sort of an evening of the score, right? Elijah has seen his comrades killed, and so it's just retribution.
Right. I mean, as we were saying before, at least in this story and many of the stories around it in the biblical text, politics and religion are deeply intertwined. And so, it makes sense that though we've had this great sort of like theological victory in this text, that the chapter begins and ends with the political reality or the political situation.
That's right. It's worth saying, so the narrative lectionary has dropped off, but in the very end of that chapter, it's worth just noting that the very next thing that happens is Elijah says to the king Ahab, go start the party because the rain is coming, right? And so Ahab looks, and there's just a little tiny cloud. First he sees nothing, and then they keep going back, and there's a little cloud on the horizon, and then there's a big cloud, and then all of a sudden the swoosh, the storm comes in. And so the story ends with the skies are growing black and there's a heavy rain, and Elijah and Ahab are running as fast as they can to get back inside at Jezreel before they get drenched. So
Right.
As soon as God defeats Baal and the people acknowledge that God is God, then the drought ends in a dramatic fashion. So we know for sure by the end of this chapter that it is the God of Israel, the Lord, who has been holding back the rain, and then God has now restored it. So that brings us to the part of our conversation where we think about what this text might say to us as people who are involved in our faith communities, trying to think about the importance of this text or the relevance of this text or the message of this text for us today. So what have you got?
I think it can be hard to claim your faith when you are living in a context where a lot of people don't claim that faith or sort of live another faith or don't have any faith at all. It can be hard to sort of be willing to voice your beliefs, as it was hard for the Israelites at the beginning of the chapter. So I'm part of a religious community, and many members of my community are secular and are part of the community because they're curious and they're searchers, and they seek human connection, and ritual is important, and intergenerational community is important, and family continuity is important, and all of those things. But I think actual talk about personal belief systems is still challenging, even within some communities of faith, including my community of faith. And it's interesting to sort of have moments where someone asks you to stake a claim, and whatever that claim is, for faith or for skepticism, you don't feel comfortable saying what you think until you have some kind of super clear sign that we in our ordinary lives don't get.
Right. So the fire coming down from heaven and giving an unambiguous sign that the thing you have staked your life to is really the thing is altogether uncommon and seems unlikely.
It's very uncommon in our times, yes. Yeah. And so that the task is to figure out how we can speak our truths and figure out what they are. Like it's worth figuring out what we think and what we believe in, and being willing to speak them in diverse company, even without quite such a clear sign as Elijah and the Israelites get in this story.
Yeah. I like that a lot, and I've got several thoughts that are kind of, I think they're connected, but where I come down with this text is, so, the way that I tend to do is I'm thinking politically, I'm thinking like societally. And so to me, this is a claim about competing gods, competing claims to which one can devote one's life. This is the thing that I'm going to put my trust in. In this text, it's Baal and Asherah, but you could imagine all kinds of other things in which to which we commit our lives.
Capitalism, yeah.
Capitalism. Right. My teacher, Walter Brueggemann, would say consumerist, militarist, therapeutic culture, right? Yeah, so if you think of it that way, so what are the claims that are being made in our culture? And in particular, what are the claims that are being promoted by the ruling authorities. Like what do the Ahabs and Jezebels of our time want us to believe, and what kinds of shrines have they torn down? And then the question then becomes, well, what kind of results do those commitments produce? When you look, it's not fire coming down to consume an offering, but it is like, what kind of world is generated by those belief systems, by those commitments, and what kind of results do you see based on those kinds of things, right? And so if you say, well, consumer culture makes us all kinds of promises, but when we look around, we see that everyone is kind of overworked and depressed, and nobody feels secure. So maybe it's the case that consumer culture or capitalism is failing us, and it's not the thing that we ought to be trusting our lives in. Now,
that's beautiful. I really love that.
As a Christian, I love that interpretation until I start to think about what kind of fruits does Christianity bear in our world today, at which point I am horrified by the loud voices of Christians in the U.S. in particular, who in my mind are claiming my religious tradition in ways that produce a lot of suffering in the world. And I think there is something false about that proclamation of that version of the Christian God, because what that God produces, what that belief produces, is not the things that I think are indicative of a true, like, what God is truly like. So I get caught in this kind of struggle between, it's not as simple as the God of my faith versus some other kinds of false gods, but there is also a falsity, I think, to things that are being done within my own faith tradition. Within this text, it seems to be like it's either Israelite religion or it's Canaanite religion. And so the parallel there is it's either like biblical faith or it's consumer faith or whatever.
Although the critique Elijah gives at the beginning is that they're trying to do both.
Oh, that's true.
And I think that we have a lot of that, people who are sort of speaking out of both sides of their mouths.
That's really helpful. So to the extent that that you have sort of conformed your religious belief to an attempted connection to the kinds of things that are being promoted.
Right, to some dominant culture, but still want to be able to hold on to your belief and say, I still am this, but I've conformed.
But really you're not. Yeah.
Right.
Really your altar has been
saying you can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing that you were making me think about is, so your claim, which I think is right, is that God doesn't speak like this anymore. Like, right, you don't see the fire coming down from the sky and demonstrating things. And I mean, in my own experience, that's true. But it was making me think of that conversation that we had a few weeks ago about what happens, that Moses says to the people on Mount Nebo when he's remembering the Sinai. God spoke to you on Sinai, but God didn't speak to them on Sinai because that was a generation ago. And so the claim of the current generation is this thing that happened a generation ago is still true, even though it didn't happen to us. It did happen. And so one can read this text the same way, which is to say, even though fire didn't come out of the sky today, like fire did come out of the sky in the time of Elijah, or at least that is the testimony of the text. And so that the belief that this God is God has been confirmed, even if it hasn't been confirmed like in my backyard.
Right, in your time. Right.
Right.
Again, sort of going back to the Jewish teaching that like the soul of every Jewish person was at Sinai. Whether or not you were born, whether you converted later in your life, whatever, every Jewish soul was there.
Right.
So the idea that we are sort of souls somehow witnessed or witness this.
Yeah, I think that's one way of getting there, or kind of the way that I would get there is this biblical text is the testimony of our ancestors in the faith, and so we believe their testimony. Whether or not that means I was somehow like mystically there, but I have received it from my forebears, and therefore I believe it to be true. And so I don't need a sign today because there already is a sign. Although I would still like to have a sign, preferably not fire.
This one was a little extreme, but it makes it harder, sort of, in our dominant culture because we see the prophets, the 450 prophets of the dominant culture, all the time.
Yeah.
Right, and so we have to work harder to hold on to this sort of inherited testimony.
I think that's right, and in a lot of ways, the prophecies of the prophets that we see all the time is more believable too, because you can actually see. If you are privileged enough to live in society in a certain social position instead of others, you can construct your life in a way that all you see are what appear to be the truths of the things that the prophets are saying about prophets, right? Like, so people do make money, like people do, live in nice neighborhoods, people do all of these things. And as long as you don't look at the other outcomes that are experienced by people who don't have that privilege, you don't have to see it. And so the stories of the false prophets appear to be true when you first look at them. Whereas this thing in the Bible about Elijah and like a burning cow seems to be like a little crazy.
Far-fetched.
Yeah.
A little far-fetched.
And a long time ago. And so you're kind of believing against the evidence sometimes.
Okay, so for our next conversation, the narrative lectionary is moving us forward into the book of Hosea, chapter 11.
Amy, it's always good to talk to you.
Y'all have a great week. It's good to talk to you too.
See you next time. This has been another episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary podcast for people on the go. Join us again next week when the Narrative Lectionary leads us into the book of the prophet Hosea, who presents God as loving the community of faith like a little child, even as the community strains against God's covenant. We'll see you then.